Yes.
Let's proceed.
Okay, just to let you know, it's recording. So welcome everybody. Just to let you know that these sessions are recorded. I'd like to welcome everybody. What we're covering off today is the action research as a methodology. It's a roundtable discussion. Dr. Pub is a mentoring community, so that provides relevant advice and to doctoral students on what to do next and how to do it quickly. Our webinars cover different topics and are frequently raised by our community members, and we welcome anybody putting any topic suggestions forward. Just by way of housekeeping, our webinars are recorded and made available afterwards. Questions are welcome during the webinar, either by unmuting or writing them in the chat. And after the recording is turned off, the group actually do a bit of a reflection, and that's not recorded, and people, particularly for those that do not want to raise anything during the recording. And this we actually find tends to have quite an interesting part, because those conversations flow. We get a lot of interactions, and that's the reason to attend our webinars, because those live interactions aren't recorded, and that gives you the opportunity to have that in-depth discussion. Now, what we're going to cover today is gaining an understanding of how to craft an action research project, understanding how to formulate the actionable research questions, and then articulate the research problem itself, learn about the steps of the action research cycle or cycles and how these translate into your action research project, and then taking that at that next step and use the action research post your research and going into the work environment. I'll have a bit of discussion around that. Now, our panelists today will be Dr. Carrie Lotion, one of the Doctorate Hub alumni and founder of Securify, Dr. Julian Rower, also a Doctorate Hub alumni, Professor Dr. Stephen McCabe, one of the Doctor Hub's mentors. Each of them have additional jobs over and above, obviously, a Doctorate Hub, and they have their working either in academia or in consulting. Now, what we might do is for our roundtable, I'm going to throw a series of questions across to the panel. And I might start with the first one is, what are your thoughts on crafting an action research project? Or what type of projects really readily lend themselves to action research? I'll throw that open to the panel and to the audience if anybody wishes to add it as well. Take your pick.
After you, Carrie.
Ladies first.
Okay.
Oh, for me.
Yes.
So crafting an action research project was actually, reflecting back on our time as a doctorate student, it was very challenging to think about, well, what is action research and how does that apply to specifically the case studies or the work environment that I was having. So I think actually from a business perspective, action research solves a lot of different problems on an ongoing basis. So realistically, like from a marketing and strategy perspective, within an organization and then within your project that you're doing, you're looking into why something isn't working properly, why, what issues are blocking performance objectives. And this really lends itself to an action research project.
Thank you. Professor Stephen or Dr. Julian, would you like to add to that at all?
Yeah, I like to look at crafting of an action research project from a practitioner perspective, which I want to believe most of our participants here today are. You begin by thinking you want to solve a problem. And by solving that problem, you want to know what your reality is. When I started thinking about what my reality is relative to the problem that I had, I also came to the realization that the way I look at a problem was different from the way the next person looked at the problem. And within that, you establish that indeed there is a problem. I'm also very much guided by Kay and King in their book on decision making for a knowable future, where they speak about what is going on here. So when you want to design an action research project, you want to establish what is going on here so that you are very clear on how or the approach you must take to remedy it. It also helps to put the subject action research into context. And for my particular studies, I looked at it as a systematic process of examining evidence to improve practice. Now, once you're very clear in your mind how you want to contextualize the problem or how you want to understand the problem that you're confronted with, then it becomes easier to know how you can go about developing an action research project. That's how I looked at it and that's how I developed my thesis and my interventions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it. And did you have any other comment to add to that at all, Professor Stephen?
Well, okay. I mean, that's really good. I mean, the key words in there, it's about sort of project, and it's also about sort of participants, and these are real life problems. Indeed, even though in my own research, it wasn't necessarily about participative action, in fact, I've slipped in the word participating action research. You often see that, but of course, the whole idea, it's the sort of the problem from the sort of perspective of those involved. And indeed, as we know in organizations, and this is why I think it sort of lends itself so well, it's about getting people to examine their own worlds and to make sense. And that's what allows me to sort of make the connection with my own research, which was carried out a number of years ago, almost 30 years ago. But it was still the sort of the idea that I wasn't trying to sort of impose my own solutions. What I was trying to do was to sort of get people to better understand and explain what they were doing. And then, I was going to say merely, but the research then reported on what they did, and they did it with varying degrees of success, because of course that's always the sort of the reality of the sort of the real world. Things that sort of are intended don't often end up the sort of the way that the original sort of objectives contemplated. But of course, as we know, serendipity and all those other sort of lovely words means you end up with sort of different solutions to things that you never sort of really understood. And perhaps, again, I'm probably overcomplicating it. What I think is the beauty of an action research approach is it allows you to sort of to see everything as it is, to make sense as is going on. It's not about sort of top-down imposed solutions. It's about sort of bringing people in, and out of that comes, hopefully, but not necessarily the solution to the sort of the problem that you thought you had, but often other sort of issues emerge and they get solved along the way. And I think what also sort of you get from this, if I can just say in conclusion, it's very resonant with what I sort of remember sort of looking at when I was trying to sort of make sense of my own research. Learning organizations, people learn as a sort of a group, as opposed to sort of to just merely being told to sort of to do this and don't ask questions. So what we're into is, as if I drop in another sort of theory, if you like, or some technique, triple loop learning, people sort of learning, applying, relearning, and of course that's the nature of life. Dare I say it? We develop as we get older, or at least we hope we do. I hope that that's added, but I think and in the terms of the three questions, that it kind of nicely encapsulates it. But again, as Jack said at the sort of the outset, if I'm looking to sort of people who are sort of tuning in, do feel free to sort of ask us questions, because of course we're perfectly open to challenge.
Okay. Did anybody from the audience want to add anything to that or ask any questions before we go on to the next one? No? Okay. What we might do is the second question is, in formulating action research questions and articulating the research problem, what considerations do you need to take into account? I might throw to Dr. Julian first up, if you don't mind.
When you're looking at formulating a research problem, what guided me was the following. One, imagining first and foremost, because I am familiar with my workplace and I can already begin to have a sense of what is not working or working well, I start by, I'm now talking about formulating a research problem. I start by imagining what an ideal situation would look like, the best practice of it in my thinking. Then number two, assess my reality as is. And my reality is not mine alone, to better understand the problem so that I can formulate a research problem I have to interrogate other people so that I can see how they look at the same problem, the understanding of it. A clear appreciation of what the consequences of those problems are, specifically the negative ones, which then can lead me, I'm still thinking about crafting a research problem, which then can lead me to a research proposal. So for me, when I was developing my thesis, I was pretty much guided by what I had experienced and that which I felt wasn't working well. And so in looking at my research problem, I had to conceptualize what an ideal situation would be, working backwards. That's how I did it. Then went to the question of my research questions. What informed that? First, with the research questions, I knew I had to be very specific. And this one, I was really guided and assisted by my supervisor.
Yeah, by because it's not this sort of thing.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, there
That
was
was
a
me.
noise cut across.
Yeah, so I was saying, with regard to the crafting of my research questions, I had to be very, very, very specific. I had to make sure that the question that I was putting together was actionable and that it was measurable, that at the end of the exercise, I would be certain that I have responded to it. The research questions was also guided, for me, guides action research process. So when I put up a research question, I had to ensure that it would guide the action research, the process and the structure. Again, my research questions were formulated by a clear appreciation of the methods that I needed to put into place so that those questions can be answered. The methods of collection, analysis, and validation. And then, of course, again, my research questions in my view or in my mind was supposed to be a dependency or a reliance in writing my final report. So when I was putting together my questions, I made sure that all those 4 components were encapsulated in them so that they could guide the entire project. That's how I looked at the research problem and the research questions, Jack.
Great, thank you. One other thing I actually took consideration with my action research cycles was being an insider, because I was actually within the organisation and what biases were I bringing to the table that then I need to be mindful of and what influence that actually had on the approach I took. So that's one thing I actually also threw in there as well. Dr. Carey, did you want to add anything to that one as well?
I think, as I recall, Jack, didn't we focus a lot just on creating the research questions? And it seemed like that was a real struggle, well, specifically for me, in coming up with that question, how we're going to do the intervention, but more importantly, not to have the solution embedded in your research question. And that was one of the things that we all struggled with. And we spent a lot of time going through, actually, I think it was a whole morning and people still had individual coaching to really strip back the questions and the sub-questions. And one of the takeaways I had from that residency and that focus on our research questions was really to identify, and I agree with what Dr. Julian just said, is not only how I'm looking at the problem as an insider, we have patterns and perceptions that are taken for granted. So really stepping back, questioning our own biases, interpretations, what's the reality, and also how is that impacting with the group of people that we're investigating and what challenges and what perceptions they have. And I think that was a really important consideration, because we can get tied up in just thinking we know the answers without actually questioning our own perceptions, biases, stereotypes, patterns of communication within one another, specifically in a team, and really reflecting on that as you create your sub-questions and looking at the context of your of the investigation.
Great, thank you, Dr. Carey. Professor Stephen, was there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, again, it also aligns. The one thing that you do not do is to sort of come along with a hypothesis. you may have certain theories, and again, would even just to add the caveat to that, if someone came along and sort of wanted to test a hypothesis, I wouldn't immediately reject it. I'd just get people to sort of think, well, what do you really mean by that? Because hypothesis testing, this is a whole sort of set of other methodological aspects that sort of are covered in other seminars. It requires control of the experiment and sort of the dependent variables and independent variables. And my view is that sort of the world is not like that. The world that we live in, and again, what we're talking about is, I believe it's about organizations where people come together and they do things, and that's why action research works so well as an approach which gets people to sort of I was going to say stand back, but you know what I mean, it doesn't, not quite literally, but to sort of to take time out to reflect upon what goes on, and what they do and how they do it. The other thing I remember, when I was reading for my PhD, which and it was in a sort of an engineering department, and I now begin to wonder what I think I must be slightly mad, because it was seen as heretical, the idea that you couldn't use were not using hypothesis testing. But that's a whole different sort of story. But I was working with a sociologist who was also seen as equally heretical. But one of the things I did pick up on was that, and I think it's really good advice, is that sort of just because you're the researcher, and I do also appreciate that that researchers come in all shapes and forms. Now, obviously, I was a sort of an academic doing a part-time PhD, so I was going into organisations. But even if you're an insider, you're the sort of person who's doing this for doctoral work. And the advice that I sort of read was to avoid the fallacy of the condescension syndrome, that you think you know better. And I think this is the problem that affects a lot of sort of, again, in my experience, in every organization I've worked in, it is the senior managers believe it's their sort of their role, their right, and it's their duty to impose solutions without first, I don't know, again, you can use the word testing them, but I mean that in a really sort of vague way. What do people think will work? And perhaps just to sort of come back to my own research, what really attracted me when I was looking at sort of aspects of quality management in the sort of the early 1990s was that there was a lot of things being written about the sort of the Japanese miracle. And what I then discovered is that sort of what the Japanese were doing was using a very much more democratic form of management, which has absolute resonance with what we're talking about in terms of action research, whereby getting people who carry out the day-to-day processes to not be the unthinking entities that merely pulling levers and pushing buttons and doing whatever is necessary, and to use the sort of the American vernacular, leaving their brains in the locker room, but more particularly to sort of be seen as thinking entities. And again, forgive me if I get sort of passionate about this. And what was really fascinating was that anybody who's ever read any sort of management will sort of come across the sort of the human relations, and human relations grew out of the Hawthorne experiment, which was the classic sort of, you were going to test something on the sort of the participants, and then the results didn't sort of match what they thought was going on. And they went and talked to the people involved, and forgive me, I'm really sort of generalized and sort of not done that sort of what came out of the Hawthorne experiment. And read the book by Schwartzman, Helen Schwartzman, which talks about, again, it's part of the sort of the SAGE research series. But understanding that sort of human beings are thinking individuals. They all have emotions and creativity and idiosyncrasies, and all sort of the dare I say it, the problems that human beings have. And dare I say it, sort of people think that we're going to get rid of when we have artificial intelligence. But hey, that's called technical systems. And if we're going to work in organizations, it's incumbent upon us to better understand how people work together. And the reality also is, and perhaps this is a good place to conclude my my dialogue, is that sort of that the universal solutions in the sort of the world of management or social systems and organizations do not sort of work in a universal way. That they have, that sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. And indeed, in my experience, that sort of a solution that works for a bit may no longer work because people feel differently. But hey, that's the sort of the nature of the world that we operate in. And I fully acknowledge the sort of the important thing is to sort of to create success, whatever that may mean. And of course, that can often be a sort negotiated. It's a kind of a bit of a fluid concept, but nonetheless, you get the best out of working with the resources that you've got and getting them to understand, you know, how well they can work and the sort of deficiencies of working together. You know, it's complicated, and finally, that the sort of the hypothetical deductive crowd, or the positivist believers, and all that those and that they sometimes seem to sort of to, it's not even as if they skirt over it. They just seem to think that all of these questions are sort of irrelevant and can somehow be managed by sort of better hypotheses. No, it's not. It's managed by better engagement.
Thank you. Did anybody have any questions or comments they'd like to make on the second point or question before we go to the next? No. Okay, the third question was, given the steps of the action research cycles in action research, how do these translate to your action research? Sorry, how do these translate to your action research project? I might put it to Dr. Julian first, if you don't mind.
The action research cycle. You're thinking about reflecting on an issue. Here I'm thinking about evaluation, and I'm thinking about how I'm evaluating my situation as is to gain a bigger understanding of what it is I'm confronting. Upon reflection, I would like to plan. I'm planning to see what kind of interventions works best to solve the problem that we are facing. So there's an element of identifying, there's an element of informing or getting information, and there's an element of organizing that information that is within the space of planning. And then you have done your planning, you now want to act. So in action research, it works best when you try. You try an intervention and then you see how best it works. And like Professor McCabe has said, it's a continuous ongoing process. It doesn't work, you look for a better way of doing it. So the cycle kind of goes all around. So that's within the space of acting. Upon acting, then of course you want to observe to see whether the objective you had set to yourself in solving a certain problem has been solved. We are analyzing, we are reporting, and we are sharing. And in so doing, we are able to find what has worked and what has not worked. And the process of reflection starts again, all over again. I see that as very, very critical in the aspect of creating an action research project, because then it speaks to the identification of a problem and narrowing it down, giving it a topic, very, very specific, developing and implementing a research plan based on what I have just discussed earlier around the action research cycle. They need to review relevant literature that further expands your thinking on the problem that you're trying to solve. Deciding on the methods that will help you analyze or interrogate the problem. Gather the data, organize and analyze it, establish the findings that comes from it, and give recommendations. From where then you can establish an action plan, communicate those results, and wait for the next cycle to begin all over again. So that's how I interconnect, how I would build a project around action research based purely on the action research cycle. Jack, that's my perception.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to add anything to that, Dr. Carey?
I think it's an excellent description that Dr. Julian shared. But from my experience and approach, and this is what I love about action research, is that as we go through, all the practitioners and scholar practitioners have a different way they've come to apply each cycle. And for me, I think it was really important the takeaway is that it's not a smooth process. You're not just analyzing, assessing, taking action, evaluating, or reflecting. It could be the process of diagnosing, which I found so fascinating, because what we learned as we're generating knowledge from first person, second person, and third person practice, and looking in those subsections as you go through the action research cycle, it really unfolded some fascinating outcomes that we didn't even realize that was kind of a sieve or filtering through what we thought was the actual problem. And I think that maybe will come under the next question, number 4, what we're going to get into, and how that goes into business. But when we start to go through the process, it's important to think on the cycle. It's okay to go back a step and come back and forward again, because you're generating new knowledge and you want to apply that new knowledge into the next cycle. And that's what action research is so amazing from my perspective, is because it's not stagnant. We're always learning. You're learning and growing together as a team in business. And as an insider researcher, you're almost capturing everybody's momentum and dissecting and analyzing what are the definitions of terms, what are the outcomes, what are the personal blocks, what are the team blockages, and really analyzing all of those things as we go through reflection and then into the next cycle. I hope that made sense.
It definitely did. Thank you. Did you want to add anything to that, Professor Stephen?
No, because it's, I mean, apart from, of course, I immediately sort of undermine what I said. I do only insofar as that don't ever underestimate the sort of the challenge of doing this. It's far from easy, because of course, as Carrie and Julian have just sort of indicated, there's a lot to unpack, and the problem of organizations is that sort of what you see and what you get are two different things. And again, without being overly critical of senior managers, they like to believe that simple solutions work, and they don't. Simple solutions may be fine, but of course they then have to sort of to work by a process of negotiation. Indeed, as Carrie was saying, there's a lot of emotions involved in all this. Again, I used to sort of to be involved in teaching management of change and researching aspects of it, and change is no bad thing, but as soon as you start to sort of to understand what that will mean in terms of the sort of the daily lives of people, you realize that it's going to have a profound effect. And again, in critical sort of reflection and all that sort of goes on, people are doing this all the time. And so what you will find, and this is a kind of, it's a health warning, but it's one which is, constructive, that you'll get a lot of the sort of the free flowing emotions that people will unpack given the opportunity. And that was certainly my experience of using this, or something which would resonate with this approach. And it's a good thing, because of course what it allows you to do is to sort of to pick up on the problems, and if you do it really well, and problems are designed democratically and collectively from within the organization, you get solutions that work, or you get things work better, as opposed to sort of to the top-down approach. But the point is, though, it may take various attempts, and perhaps what I would sort of also conclude, it's often easier on one level to do this as an insider, but I also appreciate that if you're on the inside, that sometimes you're a bit blinded to what the issues are. So you have to sort of to doing insider research, be willing to sort of to go with this, recognize what's going on, but at the same sort of time, you have to sort of to detach yourself and to try and be as possible, as much as is possible, a detached observer. So that there's advantages to sort of to being an outsider, doing the research in organization and creating the action cycles. But there's also, as I say, the advantage of being the insider, setting them up. But of course, as you've got to also recognize, you can be a bit close to the action, and indeed you may be feeling the sort of the very emotions that you're reporting upon. But nonetheless, I overall think it's a really great approach when it works, because it as I say, it allows so many things to sort of to come out in the sort of the discussions, which may not have even been contemplated and that there could be the issues and problems of tomorrow, and indeed they may be the basis of the sort of the innovative aspects and sort of creative solutions which are going to give the organization success or competitive advantage, or whatever success is judged by.
All right, thank you, Professor. Jenny, you had a question or a comment?
Yes, good morning. Yes,
Morning.
I had a question regarding the, you have the steps to the action research cycle, which is action in and of itself. And then you have the action of, I guess it'd be affecting change. Would that be right? Of what it is you're doing in the organization itself, or with the people itself. That also is an action that needs to be addressed. Is that correct, or am I off on that? Does that make sense?
That's part of the taking action. Did any of the panel like to add to that or make a comment on that?
Well, can I just ask Jenny, I'm sorry, when you said, just repeat the question, because I didn't quite understand what you were saying.
Okay, so I understand the action of going step by step through the cycle, right? The diagnosing, the action planning, the taking action, evaluating, and I understand the reflective part of the first, second, and third person. But what I'm wondering about is the effect that you have on that organization by going through the cycle is an action also. Is that, am I off?
Yeah, if I can pick that up, I can see what you mean. It's difficult, isn't it? Because again, I always remember turning up somewhere, and I was with another researcher, and he said, yeah, what we've got to be careful is that we're seen as kind of the event, whereas really what we were interested in, what was going on. And of course, there's always this difficulty if you're a researcher, is what you're doing. Yeah, would things have happened without you being there? But of course, in action research, things are happening because normally, and again, I'll be interested in the other panel's views, that this initiative, if I can call it that, whatever is going on, has been an idea that you've developed. I'm going to use the crude word hatched, which is something you think it needs to be done. You've identified the issue or the problem, and you've got a, again, I'm going to use that word, hunch that this might create a better way of doing things, and that creates, if I can sort of analogize it, that's the pebble that you drop into the water, and that creates the ripples or the waves maybe, and what you're doing is to see what the impact is, and also getting people to describe the implications of that action on their daily lives and how processes have altered and what they feel about it. But in so doing, you're getting them to suggest how further refinement of that action could be developed. And again, and it all sounds a bit vague when I describe it such as that, and I accept that. But certainly, if you look at quality management systems and quality circles in car factories, which is where I did my research, that what they would do is they wanted to solve a problem. They wanted to make a better car because that's what people want, and they would get the teams working in, or the cells or whatever they were, working on the particular production cycles, and they would get them to to stop production, because of course that's about the track flow, which caused its own issues initially, because of course that was seen as madness economically. But by so doing, that they could identify the problems, they could get people who were involved in the day-to-day processes to identify what was going on and what was not going on, or what the issues were, to create the solutions that they thought would resolve these problems, so that you wouldn't get defects coming off at the end, which either had to be rectified, which was hugely expensive, or more particularly get into the hands of customers, which caused dissatisfaction. But as what it was, and again, perhaps without overcomplicating it, turn this into a debate or discussion on Japanese management systems, it was the Japanese approach called Kaizen, continuous process improvement. And again, I think that's what action cycles are about. It's not, you don't do it once, and in fact, to preempt the question, how many times do you have to carry out the action research cycles? Yes, many times you want. You could do, you could, if it works once, fine. But I would suggest that if you do it umpteen times, because the more often that people do this, the better that they become in, and the more comfortable perhaps that they become in sort of acknowledging the duty being placed upon them, that they have a sort of a vital role in what goes on and why, and making sense. And I hope I haven't overcomplicated it, because it's not, and it's very hard. It's about simplicity, and it's ultimately about respect for the sort of the human being, which is something I really discovered very early on in Japanese management, that people, everyone, no matter what they do, they all have a really important role, and to disregard their sort of that importance is to sort of it is to undermine and disregard the vital asset that is the sort of the human being.
Any other comment at all, Jenny, or any other question?
No, it resonates, because I was in a manufacturing plant and I did 3 action cycles. So what you're saying makes complete sense. It was.
Did it fix the problem?
No, interestingly, after the second action cycle, they thought they were done. I just kept doing another one, and so management was done with me. They felt the problem had been, what they wanted to solve was solved, but what I found was something different. So,
yeah, no, and absolutely, that I think that's the beauty of it. And I think also that management, I think they're always a bit suspicious of this, because of course the first thing you're asking for is people to take time out of their work, because you can't ask people to do this after work in their own time. So you have to create the space. But the whole thing is, it's about sort of solving embedded problems which people may be aware of, or maybe no one talks about, because of course organizations are good at hiding things. So you fix the sort of the existing problems, which can be really important, and you can also pick up future problems. And what I was also going to say is that, and then management, they'll actually think, yeah, that's done, so we can move back to sort of normal sort of production cycles. I think also when people get a taste for this, they really enjoy the sort of the empowerment. That's another sort of word that was really popular about 30 years ago. They're empowered to do things, but of course, empowerment means, of course, you have to sort of give responsibility, and that makes management really nervous. I don't know if that was your sort of experience in the plant that you worked in.
Yeah, they wanted me to address a problem of their employees, but I found the problem was with management, and they were
that's classic Deming. For anybody who's not come across Dr. Deming, he taught the Japanese how to do quality management. It was an American who was sent in after the war effort to help them to rebuild industry, and that was his abiding view, that the problems exist with management, not with the workers, because the management designed bad systems. And that and of course, when they get to sort of to senior management position, they don't like to admit they've got a problem, or at least and it's not so much about problems, that it's an attitude thing. And of course, just actually to add something, I came across this wonderful organization about 20 odd years ago, Semco, run by a guy called Ricardo Sembler, and he said, that the whole what we should need to do is turn organizations upside down. And in fact, he was completely sort of extreme insofar as get rid of managers and make everyone their own personal manager. So this is empowerment taken to the extreme. He says, because people on the shop floor, or they were making pumps in Sao Paulo in Brazil, but he said that they know what the issues are. Give them the sort of the power to solve them. But of course, effectively what he was saying is get rid of managers. And we have an expression in this country: turkeys don't like to vote for Christmas.
Oh, I like that one. Yeah, it's the egos you're dealing with. Was there any other comment, or are you comfortable with that, Jenny?
I'm interested, again, because we haven't heard from Carrie or Julian for a couple of minutes, so I don't want to sort of dominate, so I'm going to keep quiet.
Well, I love Jenny's question and your comments about, they felt that 2 cycles is enough. We're there. We've completed and found the decision. And as the more that we apply action research into live business cases, the more you come across that. We're always looking for solutions, but the actual problem that we went into that launched the inquiry wasn't even close to being the true problem. That was something, a cover for it. And as you go deeper and deeper, And I think that really brings us into question 4. Not that I want to take over you, Jack, but can I give an example?
By all means, actually, let's throw into question 4, because I thought it was a brilliant segue about what are your thoughts about how you can use action research post your research and into the work environment, because I know you've done it quite significantly within the CQFI organisation you've set up. So what benefits or issues do you actually see with that?
Yeah, well, there's been so many different opportunities, because when we're using cultural intelligence, and this is what the other panelists are leading to, when we're dealing with egos, decision makers that want to implement their idea, they want to own it, and they were the solver of the problem. And actually, as we're saying, as Jenny said, management can actually be a lot of the creators of the problem. And with action research, it brings accountability to each participant. And we go through, and when we apply this, for example, we thought in the organization we were talking to, they said, well, we have a big issue retaining employees and actually building up our membership. It was a membership-based problem. But when we started to do the first and second cycle of action research, we discovered that there was a big misunderstanding between the stakeholders, and there was a real significant lack of trust. And the reason that there was a lack of trust is that there was actually many different definitions of what trust meant. So, and we were dealing with over 18 different cultures. So what we had to do in the end, going through the action research process, was to really identify, like there's 13 people on the call today, we would all have a different meaning of what is trust, what is the outcome of the issue that we're looking to achieve, and really getting that consensus on what it is and how it relates. And we made that into a customer service charter, so that everyone was going by, okay, instead of in the UK, if you get an email, you were meant to really respond within a few hours. We're in Spain. If you responded in sort of 2 weeks, that was deemed acceptable. So it was causing a lot of problems on cross-border communications, because there was that general misunderstanding. The guy from Spain or the girl, whatever, was thinking they're acting really responsibly. And the guy in the UK is really frustrated because they're not getting the reactions and feedback for the answers in Spain. So going through action research, we were able to uncover that actually now, as a consensus for European communication, it would be 72 hours. And we made that rule. And that was one of the outcomes through reflection and by starting that inquiry into why are we losing members? You wouldn't think that would come up with that sort of communication issue or misunderstanding. So that was something very powerful from my perspective. Dr. Julian?
Okay. For me, action research comes with many benefits for organizations. And I think Dr. Kari has articulated those very, very well. And I subscribe to her arguments. The other thing that I noticed as an outcome of action research is that there are also some not very great positives. Organizations are what they are, and I think McCabe Professor McCabe has alluded to where the problem sits. Largely it sits within management, and I say that with tremendous respect. So within action research, findings have been made, recommendations have been made, it's time for action. So what I learned during the period is that there's a very, very, very high risk of relapse to the old ways of doing things based on our biases, based on our prejudices. And this relapse is actually an almost natural phenomenon in most of these situations. So calls for a lot of awareness on the part of management and those people that are supporting them to help them transition from one set of a problem to the desired end. So relapse is a big problem. I also see lack of commitment. So you've come up with grand ideas on what can be done to make a difference. So, but you're faced with lack of commitment. And this comes from the mere fact that the same implementers could have been the creators of the problem in the first place. And human nature is such that if that is how I perceive the problem to look like, or my seniors will see the problem to be, then I will try to frustrate the change of it. So again, that's something that I saw as very, very practical in the area of action research, and especially when you want interventions to change the problem or to fix the problem. The last item that I see as an issue for action research is the cost of change, because every change comes with a cost in one way or the other. It could be quantitative, it could be qualitative, but I'm having in mind a change of this nature that is phenomenal based on a research that you have done that is going to change the way the work ethics in an organization calls for training, calls for development of people, calls for change in processes, sometimes calls for change in procedures and policies. And in some instances, it may call for change in infrastructure, the way the organization has been designed or it has been modeled. And this alone can be a dampener in the process of transitioning from a certain situation that was problematic for the organization to a desired new look organization. So Dr. Kari, Jackie, Professor, those are some of the things that I've come to appreciate in the area of action research. Very well intended, but the aspect of implementation can be a big problem. Thank you.
Just to add to that, the whole point of doing this is about sort of honesty, integrity, commitment, and I could add in a whole lot of other words. And right, just to say that it can be difficult to set up, because of course it's about sort of the time that's required, the commitment of the individuals, but most importantly, management have got to sort of to abide by the sort of the fundamental principle that whatever people say, and it can be sort of done with sort of anonymity, and indeed, although it's about people working together in a participative way, they've got to sort of to take on the chin, as it were, what they're told. And again, what I mean by that is management can't sort of agree to this being set up and then not like the sort of results, or more particularly because of course they've got to accept that there will be criticism, and if they're big enough, then everyone sort of moves on together, and they can't then sort of say, oh well, we like this bit, but we don't like that bit. They've got to sort of go with the whole the prescription, if you like. You can't just take the bits of the sort of the medicine that you like and that disregard those that you don't. And again, in conclusion, if they work with it and they work with it well, it can benefit everyone. Again, that's what I saw in sort of the organizations I worked in that was implementing quality management, because as I say, there's that sort of that commitment and integrity. But as I say, but as soon as you start sort of trying to say, well, no, we don't like what the workers are saying, then the whole thing's just, you might as well abandon it, because the people will not sort of commit in the future.
Okay, thank you. I actually have in the comment field, I've got one of the participants saying they're from India, they're doing their PhD scholar, and they'd like some guidance on the research topic. Can they ask a question? So if you'd like to unmute Hensi and ask the question.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Hello everyone, I'm Hansi from India. I'm a PhD scholar. Recently I joined PhD, so I don't know how to choose topic and all that, but my guide was my guide is so nice, so they suggest me some topic about digital transformation, a consumer behavior towards online transactions. So the topic is some separate area in India, Gujarat, that was the area. So I want to ask about how to write introduction. Firstly, I have done my chapter 2 literature review. So I don't get idea to write introduction chapter. Can you please give some guidance about it?
Okay, so it was in digital transformation.
So my advice is give the baby a dummy.
But yeah, digital transformation. So you've done your literature review. So if you looked at what type of methodology you want to approach, are you looking at doing action research or not?
Hello.
Yes. Did you know the methodology you were looking at utilizing?
Actually, I don't understand how to choose a methodology about this topic. It's about the consumer behavior, so I can't decide.
Can I
I
just,
think
because we're running out of time, Hensi, so just try and short circuit this. Do you have an organization to do this?
yeah, sir. It's State University. I'm pursuing for PhD from State University, which is.
So do you work there?
Sorry, sir.
Do you work in the organization?
No, sir. No, I'm fresher. I'm just completed my master degree, master in commerce. Just
Right.
and then I've applied for entrance exam and I have passed it and then got admission in PhD. That's it. I really don't have any guidance about it.
And
So
again,
I joined Dr.
Forgive me, I'm really conscious of time. We'll run out.
Yeah, we might
just
do this at the end, I think.
But it's just that, because you talked about digital transformation. I'm not even sure what that means, but you need to unpack that.
Yeah, might teach it.
Sorry, you teach it, Jack.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
at a master's level. No, I've got no comment on.
But just to say that you've this has got to happen. It can't happen in a vacuum. What does that mean? What impact will it have for the people involved? So the way to set this up is perhaps before you even sort of complete the proposal is just do a bit of groundwork by going and talking to people and get their sense of what they think is being done to them. And then the sort of the questions that you really should be researching might become apparent, but that could be a bit more time consuming. And I know it's a stage before you get to a research proposal. I don't know. I'll stop.
I totally agree, Professor. Hensi, in agreement with Professor, identify a general area of interest and why. Think about the limitations in there. Think about the impact. Think about the value it will add. Learn more about the problem by reading widely and obtaining varied thoughts, maybe from subject matter experts. Review the context of the information by way of reflection. That will give you a very, very good grounding on exactly what it is you want to do. Receive feedback. And once you have feedback, you are at liberty to now go ahead to design a research problem, design the questions that needs to support the kind of work that you want to do, and so on and so forth. I'm supporting Professor McCabe's argument. I'm just adding to what he has already said. So just think about that. I mean, it doesn't have to, it's not supposed to be painful. Just think about a general area of interest and why you're interested in that particular area. Think the limitations in it, think the impact, and just think the value that your study will add. And that should be able to help you.
What we might do is
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Oh, great, Hansi. Cheers.
I'm very mindful of the our time frame because aware of a couple of our panel members have immediate appointments straight after. What we might go on to, and then we can do the ongoing discussion once the recording stops. There is actually an identifying research gaps. There's a half-day online course that Professor McCabe will be running on the 19th of November. So if you are interested, the information is at the Doc.Hub website. There's also a research proposal and thesis crafting workshop, again, half day. I think that's a face-to-face on the 29th of October. That's coming up. And then there's obviously a number of the different clubs. So we have the combination of both the Pro and the Pro Lite options on those. And again, the information is sitting on the Doc.Hub website if you're interested to have a look at that at all. What I might actually do is switch off the recording because that's when we tend to have a lot of the discussions and the like. And so if you bear with me, and that way we can do any reflections and feedback on those. So I'll just stop the recording on that.